afternoon. Thank you for joining us. My name's Craig Polkinghorne, and we'll be talking about family businesses, the role they play in any economy really, but specifically on the African continent and the countries and economies in which they operate. There was a time when American politicians could be believed and had credibility, and it was in that time that Barack Obama said, "Small businesses are the backbone of our economy and the cornerstones of our communities." That quote makes me think about a business we bank in the coastal town of Durban. It started life as a wheelbarrow filled with meat, walking around the suburbs selling meat to the community it served. Currently, the grandson runs the business, and we recently celebrated 100 years of them banking with us. Attending the lunch and the celebration was the mother of the said grandson, and we asked her what did she do and how did she operate and how did she spend her days. A glamorous, elegant woman. She said she wakes up at 8 and she goes to the shop and she locks it up at the night, because if she doesn't do that, who else is going to do it? And she's the cornerstone of the butcher in the suburb in which she operates. It's a much bigger business than that one butcher. But she, like many of you, are the most interesting people and the most interesting businesses on the African continent, and we're lucky to serve you. On stage, we have three more of those examples: interesting people, interesting businesses. To requote from last night, these three gentlemen are unapologetically African, and they have the ability to be catalysts for both social and economic change. In the session today, we're going to focus on the family business. I hope we can cover generational change and succession. We see a lot of that. I hope we can cover family wealth versus the business itself and the separation of those two different kind of thoughts. And then lastly, we'll talk about investment, the capacity for investment, and also employment and how do we think about that. And then lastly, I'm going to ask them a difficult question. I haven't told them what it is, but hopefully we'll have enough time for that as well. But to start with, by way of introduction, I'll let them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their businesses, because they're all in different stages, different parts of the continent, and we'll take it from there. Amin, why don't we start with you?
Thank you very much, Craig. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aminu Umar. I am MD, CEO of Sea Transport Group. We are transporters of energy. We started as a Nigerian company transporting the refined products within Nigerian coast. But over the years, the company we started in 2008. So I founded the company in 2008, and we have developed to international. We are one of the biggest shipping company in the country, and we have scaled up not only in transportation of energy. We have floaters where we produce store and storage for crude oil. We have also invested in retailed, refined or retailed distribution, which is also part of our business. And we have some joint venture business, which is providing port agency in Nigerian ports and around West Africa. So the company moved with the support of Standard Bank. We have scaled up to, today we are in revenue of about $300 million per annum, and EBITDA about $70 million per annum, group EBITDA. And we have an asset value of almost $350 million. So this is the short story of Sea Transport. Thank you.
Adrian, before we move to you, I'd encourage you to go and before we move to Adrian, I'd encourage you all to stalk Amin's business at Sea Transport. The photos and the scale of the business and the services that they offer is much more than just moving some fuel around to and from Nigeria. It's really worth going to look at it, and the picture of the ship is very impressive for those of you who like to see huge things like rockets and tankers and things like that. Adrian, on to you.
Thanks, Craig. After hearing profits and sales in dollars, I think I'm just going to keep quiet. So I'm not going to give you any figures. So my business is called Hungry Lion. We are a fast food business. Think of a South African KFC selling deep fried chicken. It's not a glamorous business, but quite popular in South and Southern Africa. We currently have about 340 stores, opening 100 this year. Quite big expansion plans if we can get some capital somewhere. And it started in 97. I joined in 2000, 2001. Then, through a bit of nepotism, got the opportunity to buy 50% of the business, and then grew it for a couple of years. 2016, I stepped out of the business to work within Shoprite for 3 years. Shoprite owned the other 50%. So I'm an accountant by training, but a technologist in my heart. So I was the chief digital officer for Shoprite for 3 years. So a lot of the stuff that's now in the 60/60 world and some of the technologies that you see, a lot of those things we sort of started in the early days and played with it. So I wouldn't say I was part of the success, but I was at least there when some of the foundations were laid. And then in 2018, Shoprite was a willing seller of their 50%, and I was a semi-willing buyer. So we negotiated a good price, and then took the company totally private, and then moved the offices, switched over from SAP to Sage, set up all the infrastructure while we still selling chicken, and just sort of built the business after that.
We'll come back to a few more questions on the expansion, particularly in Zambia. Zambia and beyond. Ken, let's move on to you.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks for the invite, and thank you for having us here. My name is Ken Clark. I'm the owner of Crickley Dairy and Twizza. I started life as a farmer, and fairly small, in fact, very small, so I decided that I needed to add value. And I think that has probably been my business preoccupation, is how to add value to what you have. And I started marketing milk into the Transkei on a very informal basis, then built the dairy and moved to Queenstown. And eventually I decided that the packaging companies were controlling our margins. And I decided I need to find a solve for this to enhance my gross margin. I saw a very primitive operation in Krugersdorp and decided that I'd need to investigate this, and so Twizza was born. And we grew quite exponentially from about 2008 onwards. We have 3 plants now, one in Middelburg in Mpumalanga with 30,000 bottle in our lines, and a plant in Queenstown with 3 lines in it, and one in Bellville in Cape Town with 2 lines in it as well. We pack the Spa brand, and I'm a bit of a techie, so I enjoy the piece of taking a business and putting it into your business and taking the value out of that. So we do what we like to call in our business pellet to pallet. So we'll buy the pellets of PET, and we'll make the bottle, we'll make the cap, we'll fill the bottle, we just buy the label, we shrink wrap it, we transport it to the end consumer, and we look to take cost out of that value chain and therefore enhance our margin. I think I'll leave it there.
Ken, question, because it's always impressive. How many units do you produce per annum?
It's about 150 million, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just something that the average person might find quite interesting. Some of the lines run and they produce bottles, 9 bottles per second.
Wow.
It's a lot of drinks, Let's get into the meat of the topic. Ken, I'm going to start with you to talk about what have you done and thought around generational change and succession. So there are two components to this, I suppose. One is that for those of you who know the geography of South Africa, Queenstown is an inland town in the Eastern Cape, so not near a port, not necessarily near where all the skills are. And to add to that complexity, the founder, owner, engineer has accounting sons, who generally accountants aren't skilled at the kind of thing engineers are. So there's a tension there and a generational change problem to start with. Why don't you tell us how you think about it and what you've done?
So, Craig, I think, when I was about 58 and I was working damn hard, I started thinking to myself, well, I wonder if these boys are ever going to come back and, and show an interest in the business sort of business. Otherwise, I'm going to sell it, And lo and behold, Lyle came back and he said, he'd like to join. And he became a personal assistant first and really just listened and took over all the emails. And so he got to understand the business. And I've always said to every member of the family, and I've got 4 sons, all of them in the business, and I've always said, don't expect to occupy a position that you can't fill the shoes of. So everybody is welcome to be part of the organization, but understand it's going to be commensurate with your skills. Otherwise, it just becomes a disincentive for anybody else around you. So I think that was really important. And I can say that, I took my eldest, I chucked him in the deep end as an accountant, and I fired a general manager of a plant, and I said, there's an opportunity to make a name for yourself. And which he did. And as a result of that, he stood out to his peers, and he has been able to work his way to become CEO of the operation because he was the best person available at that point in time, and I still believe he is. And that's been great for the family. As you know, keeping it in the family there's a pride element to it. There's no doubt about that. But he brought a new dimension from a point of view of my skills as being typically engineer. I'll look at a building and I can put a plant in here and I can visualize how I'm going to do it. He has no idea of what to do there, but he's a very good accountant. And he's refined our reporting. We've built our IT infrastructure and created applications for our salespeople, our logistics team, and taking cost out of the equation on that basis. So he's also looked at the culture of the organization. We've been a top employer for the last 4 years. And so he has brought another element to it. And when I was I must also say that we got Lyle into YPO, and Thomas is part of YPO as well. And I think YPO has been an amazing organization to give young people the opportunity to meet other people and to meet other successful people and to get ideas off of them. And I think that's really, really, really crucial. And, being a people-centric organization, it's all about training and upliftment. So Lyle's busy with a owner-president's program with Harvard at the moment. He goes over for his final semester later this year. And so we train everybody within the organization. And I like to say that the people on the line came to us without skills. We've trained them, and they occupy a very important position in the organization. They've learned a skill which they wouldn't have learned if they hadn't been with us.
Ken, to come back to your comment on YPO, I think Adrian and Lyle met each other at a YPO event. So there's a natural segue, Adrian, to your thoughts on a slightly different position on generational change.
Yeah, Craig, actually YPO, I grew up as a YPO kid. My dad was a YPO member. So it was actually interesting. In those days, it was a mostly Jewish organization in Cape Town. My dad was a founding member of the Cape Town chapter. I think he was the token Afrikaans guy. And so I grew up with a lot of business people and events, and like you said, you get exposure to lots of interesting businesses, interesting conversations, which you don't typically get as a young kid. I traveled with my dad from age 8, 9, store visits, traveled throughout the country. I always knew that when we went into a store and there was sort of some issues in the store, I was sent to the toy aisle to go and pack the shelves and make sure everything is right there. So it was a good way to get exposure to business. The advantage that I have, I think, is that it was not a family business. So I did not inherit a business. I inherited the skills and the knowledge and the style of a family business without getting a business, which was, with hindsight, our chairman actually asked me one day if I would like to become the CEO of Shoprite. I said, definitely not. I saw what that entails, and I'm not too keen on doing that. And I think it was more a hypothetical question. I don't think I was in the running. And then I got the opportunity because of capital allocation to do my own thing and continue a family business within retail, within the space where I gathered the skills that gets passed on through a family setup. Because I got exposure to that, which would not be typical in the listed corporate environment of today. I sat in meetings, I flew in planes, I was exposed to different things. It was one. Our household and our lives were sort of intertwined. For instance, we went on a holiday through Mozambique and Zimbabwe and Zambia in the early 90s with camper vans. Meanwhile, we were actually looking for sites. So it was sort of driving from small town to small town. And those are the type of things that it was constantly part of the life that we lived. And I think I could, when I were capable to buy into Hungry Lion, the business, I could get the capital required to do that because I had the skills already, but it was my own business, which was actually a blessing. So we didn't have the typical passing of the torch where it's the same business and it's the dad knows better than the son and all those type of issues. And I've seen that within some of the YPO discussions that we've had for people that don't know what YPO is, it's the Young Presidents Organization. It's a business organization, and sort of with the goal of continuous learning. And a lot of the discussions are typically how do you hand over that baton? I said earlier, how do you hand over the torch without burning down the building? And that's a difficult thing. And I'm already thinking about that now with 3 boys. My sons are 16, 14, 12. And how do they get exposure to the conversation about the business? How do I involve them in the business? How do I show them certain things without putting pressure on them to feel that they're obliged to take over the torch? But it's something that doesn't happen overnight. I think it's something that you have to work on for many, many years. And it's not something that's historically been a conversation that's easy in a family. But we're very open in terms of talking about money and debt and equity and all these things. In actual fact, my almost 12, 11-year-old son, we were on school holiday in the last 2 weeks, and he asked me, Papa, hoeveel skuld het jy dan nou? Ek sê, nee, ons het baie skuld, ons klomp skuld. Hy sê, so jy's eintlik bankrupt. So he understands that there's a business, we want to build stores, we have to borrow money, and you get a return on investment. So even at age 11, we talk about these things. And I think that's important for him to understand, what that means. that they don't grow up in a expectation that there's lots of money.
I saw lots of my colleagues nodding my head. For those who don't understand Afrikaans, it was the son asked, how much debt do you have? And the father answered, we've got some, and the son kind of responded to say, but we're not bankrupt. And I saw lots of my colleagues nodding, thinking debt is good and we're going to lend more to this guy. I mean, you had a similar, when we were talking earlier, you had a similar experience in that your uncle led you into exposure in an industry that allowed you to be where you are today.
Yes. So thank you again. So I am a little bit different from the way, but I'm also a product of a family business. I will not agree less with what Ken just said. The truth is, I think family business in Africa gives you a platform to upgrade your competence, to have the chance to be able to learn more and be able to make the mistakes you're supposed to make. And just like he said, it gives you also the platform to have the network that you need to, because to make, if we go, across, particularly from the country I come from, Nigeria, you see very celebrated entrepreneurs were all product of family business, because mostly in order to access capital as a startup is very difficult. Even though we're sitting at a standard bank group, it's very difficult for a bank to look at you when you start in the beginning with an idea. There is nothing tangible for the bank to say, we want to finance something. So since it is just an idea, you're pushing forward. So usually the family, there you get some chances in that platform where you can be able to display your competence, where maybe they can, family can give you some equity contributions, which you might get. And I think a living example in this continent is the most celebrated entrepreneur, Alaji Dangote, whose story I think many have already heard. He was given, I think, 60,000 naira by an uncle to start the trading business to where he is today. So if he had no uncle at that time to give him this and give him the training in the trading of commodities which he had at that time, and that platform really propelled him and gave him the competence to be where he is. So I had similar, my uncle introduced me to this shipping business, and as just a normal staff in the company, but gave me the access to learn, gave me the access to meet clients, gave me the access to meet the banks. And from there, he was in a different aspect of shipping, and through that, it gave me the opportunity to see the opportunities in a different aspect of shipping, which after that, I got his blessing to commence this business that we founded in 2008, and it has been the story of mine, actually.
Thank you. Let's move on to thoughts around family wealth. Most of the businesses that we bank, there's a property component somewhere in it, whether the entrepreneurs actually recognize they've got properties as assets or not. There's property somehow tangled up in the structures. But Adrian, we'll start with you. Family wealth, family business, family members that are in or out, family offices. There's a whole, you could write a book on all of that, I think. But you've got relatively sophisticated thinking in your family around all of those topics. Maybe you could share some of those thoughts with us.
Yeah, Craig, we never had a family office. I grew up, like I said, my dad worked every day until he was 70, and just, I use this analogy, he sort of worked every day, put money in a plastic bag and threw it over the wall. And then after 70 years, he sort of walked around the wall and he saw, oh, well, there's a hell of a lot of bags full of cash, luckily. But it was all a bit of a mess because he never looked after his own financial structures, because that was not his forte or his passion or his goal. So we actually started a family office, if you want to call it that, which was a young guy that we knew as a family, young chartered accountant. My dad he came to actually ask my dad for some advice. He wanted to go and work for a company, leave his corporate job and go to Switzerland to help an entrepreneur. My dad said, well, before you do that, one is he doesn't like people leaving South Africa, or especially nice, good skills. And he said, but come and help me rather just sort out my mess for a year or two, and then you can decide what happens. So our family office started about 6 years ago. And then we only really started looking at different structures and how you allocate capital to different categories of asset classes, like you said, property or shares and the rest. So our thinking has evolved quite a bit over the last few years, but one thing that became clear to me, and I've had this conversation not only with my wife but also with my kids, is that, as a person that's privileged enough to have a lot of opportunities financially, you have to separate money from capital. Otherwise, your head goes, you get screwed up. Because if you start seeing your capital as money that can be spent, you start making the wrong decisions. So the way that we see it in the bigger family and also in my smaller family unit is to see I'm a good allocator of capital, hence capital flows to me to be the person that can allocate that capital. That means that if my business is successful, I will get more capital to allocate to other ventures that's successful or that can lead to more capital. If you waste your capital, life will sort you out and take your capital and give it to someone else to allocate. And then there's the money portion, which is the cash that you get on a monthly basis or a salary or whatever you want to allocate that you spend. That's the money. And people, some people call me stingy, especially my dad, because I hate wasting money. And people say, yeah, you're stingy, you don't want to spend money, you don't want to do this and that. But I look at everything in terms of capital allocation. So, for instance, I'm fairly thin and quite healthy, so I never fly business class. My wife has never flown business class. People say, but you can afford it. I said, but I cannot in my mind say that to spend 80,000 rands of capital to spend 11 hours in a plane instead of 15, it's a stupid allocation of capital. So there it's sort of because
I just noticed none of the larger people clapped on that.
Some people need to allocate their capital differently.
Sure.
So I turn it around and I say I'll ask my wife, would you party all night and be upright and stand up if I give you 80,000 rands? And the answer is always yes. So I said, well, it's the same thing. You just sit upright instead of standing upright. So, and I'm not saying that there's not a place for flying business class or spending money. I mean, I think the most valuable stuff are not gained by spending money. But if you have to spend money, you can. But if you get the principle of capital that's meant to do good, split from the money that you need to live with and build memories and spend time with your family. If you can split those two, then it becomes easier. Yeah. But if you start mixing the two, then you start making the wrong decisions. And it could be something silly like, you're sitting on a beach and you're thirsty, and the guy walks past with he's selling water and Coca-Cola, and he wants to charge you 50 rands for a Coke or water. My kids now know that no, I'm not buying the drink. It's too expensive. The guy's trying to make a fast one out of me. I'll get up, I'll walk up the road to the cafe and go and buy a Coke for 15 rands or 12 rands. So those are the things that, because it's, again, it's the wrong allocation of capital, and that's a principle rather than an amount. And I think that's important. And in the context of a family setup where there's different people that's got different expectations, different ambitions, you need to spread the money equally so that everyone's got a comfortable life. And with comfortable meaning safe environment, safe car, medical, education, and all those type of things. And then the allocation of capital needs to flow to the most competent. And it makes it easier if you've got a very great big distinction between those two. Otherwise, people say, but why does that one get more money than that one? Because you all get the same amount of money, but capital gets distributed.
I think there's some interesting points there for people to digest. Ken, you've been going through something similar. You've got Clark Holdings, which is the family company versus the trading companies, and you not struggling through structuring it all, but working through structuring it in a way that makes sense going forward.
Yes. Yeah, so we're fortunate in a way that we've been able to grow to where we are and still remain 100% shareholder in the companies that we own. And I think, at my time of my life, we're probably looking to do some sort of transactions and, create a bit of a family office going forward. But, there's still huge opportunity within the businesses that we have, and we're looking to exploit those. And, we're constantly doing that, to lesser and greater degrees of success, as always happens in business, I mean, not everything you touch turns to gold, and you've got to see it through and make sure that the thing that you've embarked on really works. And so for us, we've structured our assets in a holding company so that if we do a transaction, it's still an annuity income that you're going to have. And then, we can decide what to do when with what, But I think we are really fortunate from a family point of view to own everything that we have. And I think there's the right time to do the right thing and get the best price for it if you are going to do a transaction. I think that's kind of like where we will position ourselves going forward.
Thanks. Have you got comments on this? I'm sure you have.
Well, I think I am, first I'm young. My children have not grown up that to look at, start thinking. But obviously, yes, succession planning is something that every, I think, business or entrepreneur have to think about. So I, just like one of the speakers said, maybe we have to be lucky for the children to even want to do the business. I mean, last 2 weeks I was in London with my small son, and I asked him, "What do you want to be?" He said, "I want to be a goalkeeper." So it doesn't. so I told my wife, "Are you hearing what your son is talking about?" So really, I think succession planning is, and I've seen it in many businesses, particularly in Nigeria, where many businesses are just first-generation business. The succession planning, the moment the main owner or founder is no more there, the children never, very few were able to succeed and continue. So I believe we are also surely looking at that, and I'm trying to encourage my daughter, who is in the university now, if she will want to do it, and if she is interested to look at that. But first of all, the young generation these days don't want to suffer. They say, "No, I don't want, I would like a very easy business. Anything that is easy, that is where we will go to." But it's something we're looking at. Family office, we have been discussing with friends who are also entrepreneurs like me, who we looked at and say, what do we do in case, how do we encourage our children? How do we bring them into the business at a younger age to start going on board? So for me, I started by actually, first of all, naming one or two of the ships in the name of the children. And I said, "This is your ship, so you have to go and see it." So that maybe will encourage them to have interest. and if possible, start to look at it as a profession they want to go in. And then, like you said, family office is something we're discussing with our corporate structure guys. But at the end of the day, I think as the business grow, we might, for us, the planning is to take it to a certain level and maybe list the company so that there will be a continuity, so that the business will be independent. Today, I don't participate that much in the day-to-day running of the company. So unless there is something, a problem, they don't look for me actually. So I sometimes look at myself, maybe I'm becoming redundant. So, but this is truly what is going on. So the company will continue like that, and then we see as if the succession is either family or it can be listed and somebody that is that is competent and want to drive the business more will be the one to take over.
If anyone in the audience does have an interest in family office specifically, one of the audience is Mehul Mehta, who's a client of ours who has fairly well-developed thoughts on family office and the experience they've gone through, so maybe have a chat to him. And otherwise, we have in the bank a fairly well-developed family office offering if anyone wants that. Let's get on to employment, because earlier we heard that it's one of the countries and continents' opportunities or problems. Last year at the World Economic Forum, they spoke specifically about one of the global changes and long-term trends would be a shift towards Africa's youth and what that brought the world in terms of global growth. It was a common point that was raised often as one of the big sort of change agents. And I firmly believe that employment on the continent rests with entrepreneurs. It's interesting, the World Bank defines a small business as something that has less than 50 employees in it. Personally, I don't think that's relevant for Africa. If you drive from Entebbe to Kampala, there are people there with small businesses that have got 1 or 2 people in their businesses. So I would have thought the threshold in the African context is much smaller. You guys are big businesses in the African context, I think. But some thoughts, I'm going to start with you because you've got some really interesting thoughts on employment. Maybe first around how do you think about skills attraction, skills retention, growing your staff, and then we can get on to your other point, which is around employment on the continent.
Well, okay, thanks. The discussion we had before, the economist, Mr. Gulam, made a lot of, so very good statistics. We all know that the continent is full of young, the demography is very clear. We have a young population, and we were having a discussion. I said, how do we turn it around from the way we look at it as a liability to an asset? Because the industry where I come from, which is the shipping, we have seen countries, a clear case of countries that have turned their population to an asset that brings a lot of revenue to the country. One of it is India today. In shipping world, India seafarers generate so much revenue to their country. The second country that has done such similar thing is Philippines. And if you look at it, India were able to not only bring workforce in shipping, but they have done it in medical, they have done it now, they are doing it in IT. And if you look at the funds that is being paid back into Indian economy from this workforce is over $100 billion per annum. And this is turning population to an asset, and we have seen it also in China. So this is the discussion we're having, and we said, how do we change this youth African population to an asset instead of a liability it is today? And because we are, particularly again in my industry, is industry that is dominated with English speaking, we see a lot of Africans not participating in it. We are hiring from Asia. A lot of our workforce, offshore workforce on board our ships are from Asia, from Eastern European countries, and we are not being able to get the African, our brothers to come in and sisters to participate the way we think they should. And one of the weaknesses or challenges is training and the discipline and mindset. So one day I was actually in a dry dock, and there were a Korean population who were doing it. And I was asking the my dry dock manager and the shipyard manager that, well, how do you measure performance of our Africans and the Koreans? And he told me, it's whatever a Korean can do in 1 hour, it takes the Nigerian at that time, it takes them 3.5 hours to do. So if we are needing instead if we are replacing one Korean, we replace with 3.5 people to be able to do the job he is doing. And this, made me start thinking that maybe it's not physical. It's not like we lack the physical strength because we are actually built bigger and more stronger. Our bones are bigger but it means maybe it's the discipline on the mindset of being continuously to be productive and focus on the job. We get distracted maybe easily. So I think it's all about the training, and I think our government need to focus on that and make it a strategy. In Nigeria, we had this discussion with our ministers and policymakers. How do we make a strategy like the way India is doing to be able to turn this youthful population and make it an asset? So I am part of it as a president of the Nigerian Chamber of Shipping to look at this strategy together with the government. So this aspect is what I had a discussion with Craig a while ago, and I think businesses in Africa, we have a platform to do this training and change this mindset and awareness for the African population. Thank you.
Thanks. I think there's an interesting point there on the entire maritime industry. If we turned it into a competitive advantage on the continent, would be an interesting concept with colleges, schools, training at whatever level it might be. Adrian, you have a penchant for things like AI and data. You have an affinity for those topics. How do you think about employment, staff, training in Hungry Lion, given that you want to introduce highly advanced technology at the same time?
I'll answer it sort of combining the question that you asked just now in terms of employment. So I'm going to take it a step back. 2 years ago, we had a year-end function at Hungry Lion, and we don't have missions and visions and statements on the walls and all those fancy things. And I, sort of made my year-end function speech to the staff, and I said, my goal at Hungry Lion is to help fix the problems in South Africa so that my kids don't want to leave. That's sort of my goal. Why am I working every day and getting up? And how do I do that? So one is I've got capital allocation, and how can I use it to the best ability is to create jobs. So we actually, if I put a spreadsheet, and that's why I asked you earlier if I could put up a spreadsheet to answer this type of question. I put up a spreadsheet to my staff saying, and the spreadsheet starts by 40,000 jobs by 2032. And then we sort of work backwards to say, how do we get to 40,000 employees in 10 years? So this was 2022. We've since revised it. It's now by 2030. So we've turned up the speed a little bit, or we're going to try. And then we had sort of workshops. All my department heads and Rudy, my CFO, sitting here. I said to the team, everyone had to go and prepare and say,